Hello everybody, I'm Hunter Ohanian and I'm the director of the College Art Association, and I'm here with Holly Hughes, one of the NEA Four. Hello Holly.
Hi Hunter.
How are you?
So good to see you again.
You too, thank you, thank
In
you.
your new perch.
Yes, I know. Here we are perched up here on the
On the hot seat.
on the hot seat, indeed. Holly is a CA8 member, and tell us what you're doing now.
I am a professor at the Penny W. Stamp School of Art and Design at the University of Michigan,
Great.
and I get to direct a really cool program in inter-arts performance where students from the School of Art and Design get to create a curriculum with classes in that school, in the School of Music, Theater, and Dance, making original time-based work.
Great, and you're making work yourself these days?
I am making work myself
Yeah.
and hoping to do a premiere at New York Live Arts next year.
Fabulous, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. And you
Thanks.
enjoying living in Michigan?
I enjoy living in Michigan, and I enjoy coming to visit here and having other opportunities, and it's
Great.
fun to teach.
Well, thank you so much for coming in, and
Oh,
happy to have you here at CAA. So, as I said in the beginning, Holly is a member of the NEA Four. So, tell us what that means.
Well, I was one of 4 performance artists who was awarded funding in 1990, and then it was revoked because of political pressure. And it was during a time when there was a lot of anxiety about public funding for the arts, and particularly art that talked about the body. And it was sort of at the height of the AIDS epidemic, and 3 of the artists were making gay-themed work, and actually were gay, and then Karen Finley made and continues to make very powerful feminist work. So we were not the only artists working in those areas, but we got kind of singled out and made into poster children.
So your grant, you actually received a grant from the NEA, and then it was taken away.
That's correct.
How much was the grant for?
$5,000.
Wow, wow.
Which was more
A
money
lot,
in
sure.
1990, but it still wasn't life-changing money, and I believe the government spent well over $2 million in legal costs to pursue a lawsuit against us to, maybe $25,000 between the 4 of us. So,
And that case went all the way to the Supreme Court, I
went all
think.
the way to the Supreme Court.
Unbelievable. And if I remember correctly, that actually led to the NEA actually doing away with individual artist grants.
Yes, there were a number of these cases of artists being singled out for the type of work they were making, and the government kept losing in the court system. And unfortunately, under Bill Clinton, they decided that there's an easier way to do this. We can just eliminate funding for all the individual artists except for the writers. I don't know, somehow the literary world pulled together and preserved individual funding for
And
artists.
I also think that folk artists in North Carolina are still preserved as well too, which may have something to do with one of the opponents to what was going on. But
Could
it's,
be,
yeah.
could be.
Do you remember the project? I'm sure you do. What was the project?
Well, it was a fellowship grant, so it was less about like I'm going to do this project, and was more about like based on the body of work supporting. So I think one of the things that I wanted to do was to pay the people who had already helped me create some work and were working for free, and get better videography of the work that I was making at that time. I think I also did pitch a project that I was going to do, and I got so caught up in that battle that I've completely forgotten about it, what I had proposed to do.
Wow, wow. So here we are now, 17 years later. That was in 1990, and we now have a new president. We have a new government, and as you know, just about 2 weeks ago, I think on March 17th, the president proposed what's known as a skinny budget. And in the skinny budget, he proposed cutting funding completely for the NEA, the NEH, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, IMLS, and about 15 other agencies in the domestic budget. And in large part around cutting the funding for the NEA and the NEH, he's relied upon recommendations by the Heritage Foundation, which has apparently been around for about 40 years. They pride themselves in being a true conservative organization, And they came up with 10 years ago 10 reasons why the NEA and the NEH should be defunded. And I guess this is what the administration is using as its rationale for defunding those two agencies. So I thought maybe you and I might talk about those 10 reasons why the Heritage Foundation thinks that they should be defunded, and see what we think of them. How's that?
Sounds great.
Good. Reason number one they give is that the arts will have more than enough support without the NEA. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that some of the major cultural institutions around the country might have enough support. They might be able to get wealthy donors, friends of Donald Trump, in fact, to donate to them. But what I'm concerned about are the smaller art organizations around the country and serving underserved populations. Their NEA funding goes to all 50 states. It goes to every congressional district. We were just discussing that. And so those organizations and that funding did not exist before the NEA, and it is unlikely to exist without some sort of support. And so I think it cuts off huge parts of the American population to access to art making and art viewership.
Yeah. The other thing that's interesting too, of course, is that many of the grants are 10,000, 15,000, 20,000. Those aren't going to make or break an entire organization, but they may mean that a very important program is not going to happen.
That's right. An important program might not happen, and it could be community access programs. It could be classes and workshops that are offered for free. There might be other special events that get canceled.
Sure, and also I think having the NEA funding for some of these really gives other donors the confidence that they should invest in those programs as
Absolutely.
well too.
It's like a stamp that says what you're doing is legitimate, it's valuable, and then someone might, a private donor or other foundations might chip into it. So
Sure.
the NEA is important seed money for a lot of programs.
Yeah, I mean, in my 20 years in working in arts organizations, thinking about it now from Provincetown to Aspen to Boston, I think continually I've headed up programs that have had NEA funding, and it really has been a major piece in talking to other donors and other foundations. It's where you start describing, who else is supporting the programs that you have out there. So, okay, reason number two, the NEA is welfare for cultural elitists. Now, again, this is the Heritage Foundation speaking.
Right.
What do you think about
Well, that's
that?
like kind of a mashup of two different categories a little bit like, to me, like blueberry Asiago bagels. I mean, it manages to both deride the poor through its slam on welfare,
Right.
and then position arts as something that's only available and accessible to the very rich.
Right.
And again, the mission and the vision of the NEA has always been about democratizing art access.
Right.
It's the same as like public libraries and public parks. They're about making these public goods available truly to the public, and not just people who can afford to pay huge amounts of money to access them.
Yeah, and these words really feel like coded words to me too.
Oh, they're totally coded.
And the idea of welfare, they're just trying to give a message out to somebody for a negative connotation there, and also to call people interested in the arts elitist, I think, is another coded word as well.
I think the president is motivated by this idea that anybody who's not a 1%er is looking for a handout.
Right, right.
That so we're all on the take.
Right. Yeah, that's the implication.
Yes.
So heritage reason number three, the NEA discourages charitable gifts to the arts.
Charitable gifts to the arts are generally supported through tax breaks. You get a tax deduction if you itemize your tax returns given by wealthy people, and unless the president is successful in rewriting the tax code, people, including friends of his, will continue to give money to the arts. It has
Right.
nothing to do with it. In fact, I would go back to our earlier argument and say that once somebody has received NEA funding, an organization, that they're more likely to get charitable. They're more likely to just pop up on the radar and have somebody know about it, and maybe they'll be able to hire somebody who can raise the media profile so that donors would know to give to this organization.
That's exactly right. As I was saying, when I talk to other individual donors or talk to other foundations, the fact that you get NEA money really does let them know that we're serious in the organization. And according to the studies, apparently for every dollar every dollar spent, $9 are leveraged. So it's the actual inverse of this, that NEA funding actually loosens more money as opposed to competing against money out there. And the other thing too, which it ignores, is the idea that in the United States, the entire cultural budget of the economic impact is somewhere over $700 billion, which is just astonishing.
It's astonishing for 1 year, for the most recent year,
Right.
2013.
Right.
$700 billion in 1 year
Right.
that the arts have generated, and
Right.
there's something like 5 million people that
Right.
are employed.
Right.
In that year, the last year they have stats for. That's huge.
Yeah, it's a huge impact. So again, when you think about the idea that the current NEA budget, or what's being requested in this year at $155 million, given the amount of potential that comes out there, it's just a drop. And also when you look at the entire U.S. budget, the NEA is 0.00008. The NEA and the NEH together is it's just a small percentage of what
Right.
the budget is.
Well, I'm sure when Trump is looking at places to locate his hotels in, he's looking to cities and neighborhoods within those cities that are considered attractive and attract tourists who are going to spend a lot of money for a luxury hotel. And what attracts them? It attracts cultural institutions.
Right.
So there's lots of conversation that's very complicated and hard to get into about how the arts drive economic development. But there's no doubt that having a strong cultural scene in a neighborhood and in a city are economic engines.
Sure, no question. All right, Heritage Foundation reason number 4, the NEA lowers the quality of American art. So how do you imagine that happens?
Well, as I said, Hunter, now I'm a professor. I am a professor at the University of Michigan, which means I grade papers
Right.
that might read like this paper. It's a paper where they make an assertion like that and then they back it up with data. And it's full of quotations from people who lived and wrote before the NEA even existed.
Yes, I think Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Ralph Waldo Emerson is called in to weigh in on the NEA, and I think, I'm just going to guesstimate that he may have died 100 years before it existed, and all the other citations are also similarly people who are not really writing about the NEA or wrote about some other program before the program existed, with the exception of one critic, the late Hilton Kramer, who is kind of to art history and art criticism what the one climate scientist who thinks that climate change isn't happening, or it's not happening because of human intervention, or the one sort of intelligent design geologist. So he's kind of a unicorn. I think he's not been with us for a while. So I don't know that their data they're using to back up this assertion would warrant a passing grade at the University of Michigan.
The other thing is it just is counterintuitive in the sense that if you think about the NEA awards all being peer reviewed, you've got experts in the field who are doing it.
That's right.
You've got heads of museums, you have faculty members, you have scholars, whether it's on the NEA or the NEH. And so there are people who imagine if every agency in the government before any dollar was given away had to be reviewed by the absolute experts in that field before it was given away. I mean, it's sort of unimaginable to imagine that happening. But again, artists and educators and scholars are held to this incredibly high standard, and then we're told by people like the Heritage Foundation that we're lowering the quality. If anything, we're actually raising the quality by such a great system that's in place.
That's true. There's rigorous peer review and using a pretty high level of criteria to evaluate the work that's being done and the impact it makes.
And again, for a lot of the NEH grantees, the reporting and everything that has to happen, I mean, every penny has to be accounted for.
Yes.
And this is not something which is done in a very casual or silly way. So, all right, Heritage Foundation, reason number 5. Oh, this one I like. The NEA will continue to fund pornography.
I have a word for the Heritage Foundation,
Yeah.
which is, actually it's 3 words. It's called the World Wide Web. You may have heard of it. And guess what they provide? Access, free and unfettered access to pornography if you can figure out how to get around those parental settings. So I recommend that people just go there for free and avoid the government-funded pornography, which is possibly non-existent, but probably not as, you know, there's other ways to find it. And I hope that they avail themselves of this knowledge.
What do you think that's really all about? Are they literally just saying that work that we make is pornography?
Well, I think when they came out with these assertions, it was at the height of an anxiety about the growing visibility of a lot of queer and feminist artists. And one way to sort of discredit it was to just label it pornography.
Right.
And nothing against pornography,
Right.
but it's
But just simply because one might have queer work or feminist work or even body-based work, that doesn't in and of itself make it pornography, and that's what they're trying to do.
right. They're just you know, and they do this with other forms of expression that come out of underrepresented groups, of
Right.
just sort of erasing the value of it with some sort of scare label.
Right.
Although pornography is incredibly popular. And
And I bet with some of them it's probably popular.
it
too.
is
Who knows,
probably
but
popular. Yeah.
Who knows? All right, reason number 7, the NEA wastes resources.
Well, in 1990, American taxpayers paid 63 cents
Per year.
per year, each person, for the NEA.
Right.
I'm assuming it's possibly less now because the budget is less than it was in 1990. And I don't know, maybe people can find another good use for that 63 cents. But, you know, I find it difficult, even if I go to the corner store, to find anything that is less than $1.
Correct.
So I think that their 63 cents are incredibly well invested, and nobody's life is going to be ruined. I mean, it's another story about the amount of money that Americans are paying to fund Mrs. Trump's decision to live separately from her husband, which I appreciate and understand and possibly even support, but I don't know if I want to financially underwrite it.
Well, and also we've read stories that, for example, the cost for that decision may be very close to the entire budget of the NEA. I read something recently where it was $148 million to supply support for Trump Tower, and the NEA budget is $155 million. So really one for the other. It's interesting.
It sort of implies this unusual approach to paying your taxes, that
Right.
perhaps it comes with a menu, you know, like a classic old school Chinese menu where you pick, or a prefix, a fancier version where you pick the categories you're going to fund, like,
Right.
oh, I'm going to fund all of these. And if that's the case, then I'm going to move some of my money out of military funding and put it into public education and public housing and the arts.
Right. And of course, we only get to do that with our votes. We don't get to do it on the
No,
line item
no,
way
no.
that way.
So,
Yeah.
nice try.
Yeah, nice try, but I still don't see it either. All right, let's go on to the next one. Number 9, the abolishing the NEA will prove to the American public that Congress is willing to eliminate wasteful spending.
I don't know, 63 cents. That's what I would say. I mean, I think that there's a lot of other places to look at the way the government spends money in giving huge tax breaks to Donald Trump and people of his
Sure.
class.
And also, I think this also goes to what we said earlier about the idea of how much money is actually leveraged, in the
Yes.
sense for every dollar that they spend in the NEA, $9 are actually leveraged, and the total economic impact is billions and billions of dollars. So I don't see that there's anything here. Reason number 10, funding the NEA disturbs the U.S. tradition of limited government.
So this country was founded by a bunch of white guys who had lots of problems, including slave owning among them, but they were Enlightenment era people. They believed in these ideas of democracy. They believed in a different system that was very different from the class stratifications of Europe, and making the public welfare, which is part of our Constitution, a high priority. So public education, support for a democratic society which needed to fully participate in civic dialogue. So I think that that limited government speaks to civil liberties more than it speaks to public funding options.
It's so funny too, because if you think back about some of our founding fathers, whether it was Thomas Jefferson or George Washington, I mean, they all spoke about the importance of having an educated, as you say,
Yes.
it was primarily at the time landowners and white and male, but still it was the importance of having a society which was educated, so that the humanities and the arts and science were all emphasized as being important things as far as showing who we are as a culture and trying to reflect our culture. And quite frankly, I think that the U.S. View around the world is of a generous society. We certainly have been very generous out there, and we want to give as many people a chance as we can, and programs like this allow it to happen. So what do you think is going to happen to the funding about the NEA?
I hope that the Trump administration will be dealt the same kind of blow that they were just dealt with on health care, on their entire budget. It's the entire budget seems to be about cruelty and greed, and just as they outsourced to the Heritage Foundation the rationale for cutting the NEA, they've outsourced a lot of the rationales for cutting education, cutting help for poor and elderly and disabled Americans to other conservative think tanks. And it's not very thought out. This paper from the Heritage Foundation is 17 years old,
Right.
and doesn't really pass the smell test. So I'm hoping that that our leaders in Congress will really scrutinize it, and I'm hoping that Americans will reject the cuts to the NEA as well as the rest of the budget, because it's only going to, it's welfare for elite 1% Americans.
Right. And for an organization like the College Art Association, we have 10,000 members, and primarily they're artists like yourself, or educators, or researchers, or scholars, and these programs are just so important as far as being able to help fund the programs that they do, and also to help fund the work of their students and the future work of their students, and so it is key to us. I agree with you. It seems the last couple of weeks I've been able to spend some time in Congress. I've been fortunate to have a number of meetings, and it seems as if there are many members of Congress who just simply don't buy these cuts, that it doesn't make sense, that they really do understand that number one, the NEA and the NEH and some of these IMLS and Corporation for Public Broadcasting and others provide a tremendous amount of support to what we as a culture actually do. And they also see the financial impact, as we've been talking about too. But I guess it's really incumbent upon all of us that, to the extent that we're inclined to reach out to our representatives and senators throughout the country and let them know the importance of these programs. On the CAA website, we now have an advocacy toolkit to allow people to find out who their representative is and talk about what programs have been funded in their area. And so I think they should reach out there as well too. And I know people are sending emails and writing letters. And again, talking to congressional offices, they definitely say that stuff matters. So people, I think, really need to take a moment and let their representatives know how important that they think this is for them.
It's so true. It's incredibly easy. There's
Right.
all these websites, including yours, but Indivisible and lots of other groups that make it very easy for you to find out who your members of Congress are and
Right.
how to contact them.
Yeah.
And it takes very little time. I mean, I'm calling my senators and my representative all the time and sending them emails. And they're not lengthy conversations, but making my voice heard, and I think we've had some success,
Yeah.
and we need to remember that.
Right.
That the outcry against their disastrous health care package is what helps doom it, and let's work on this on turning back this budget proposal.
Sure, I think that's a great idea. So enjoy the rest of your time here in New York.
I will.
Thank you. Have you seen any good art since you've been here?
Well, I went to the Whitney,
How was that?
and well, it's a very rich and interesting and controversial exhibition, and I would say that the sort of holding that space for a charged and necessary conversation seems important. I'm going to see some theater, all of which I think started out in NEA funded spaces.
Great. Yeah.
And seeing my other NEA supported art friends around the city.
Great, great. Well, that's
And
good.
other CAA members. Hello.
Holly Hughes, one of the NEA Four, thank you so much for being here.
Oh,
It's
thank
a great
you,
pleasure.
Hunter.
It's a great pleasure to talk about these funny Heritage Foundation reasons, but thank you, and I'm sure our members appreciate it too. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for the work you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Okay.